So now it's time to attach the cuff to the sleeve. And this bit here is going to be where we pin the sleeve to. So we want to take this folded area and just bring it out of the way so we don't accidentally sew over it. So we just pin that out of the way. So I'm now going to grab the sleeve, and at the bottom of the sleeve you can see there's the vent, and I've done 2 lines of stitching all the way along, one at 1/4 inch in and one at 3/8 inch in, leaving long tails at the end. And I'm going to pull it tight so that it's nice and gathered. So I've gathered the sleeve so it's nice and tight, and now I'm going to start pinning it to the cuff. So we can see on the cuff that we had brought that line of stitching all the way up onto the edge there, and that is where we're going to use to align our sleeve. So making sure that the sleeve is right side to right side, we're going to take the edge of the vent and align it right on the inside of that line of stitching there and pin that in place. And then I'm going to take the other side of the vent and align it on the inside of this stitching and pin that in place. And now I'm going to slightly release the gathering as needed, just so that I can make it fit onto the cuff. So I like to spread it just enough that's starting to look like it's going to fit, and then I find a middle point and attach that and just kind of check that there's about the same amount on both sides, and then I will pin that into place, and then I'll work on another half of it, and I'll kind of spread the gathering, find about half, pin it in place, and then continue doing that until it's pinned all the way across. So now the cuff and the sleeve are completely pinned together. The gathers are evenly spread along the cuff, and the cuff is nice and flat. It doesn't have any gathers itself. And now I'm going to take it to the machine and sew it with a 5/8 inch seam. Now our cuff is sewn on to the sleeve, and we now trim that seam allowance down to 1/4 inch, and then we will take the cuff and bring it to the ironing board and press the seam down towards the cuff like that. So now it's time to turn the cuff right side out, and we're going to end up hiding that seam there. So if you take the cuff, making sure that that pin you put in earlier is removed, and turn it right side out. Now once it's right side out, bring it to the ironing board and give it a good press so that all your corners are nice and crisp, all these edges are nice and flat all the way around. So our cuff is nice and pressed, and you can see from the inside of your sleeve that the fold you made at the beginning is covering your line of stitching. And so what we're going to do is start pinning it shut, but from the right side, because that's the side we're going to top stitch on. And once we finish top stitching, this fold will have hidden away that seam. So with that all pressed up into place, if we turn it over, I'm going to start putting pins in right along this edge here to hold that loose fold in place. I've put the first 3 pins in on the right side, and I just wanted to show you how I put them in. I put the first bit right in on the seam line so that I can turn it around the other side and just make sure that it is going to catch that fold all the way along. And I can also at this point make sure that this is also laid nice and flat. And if it isn't, it's a good point to make adjustments. You can see if the seam's going to be tucked in and it's not coming out of the top there. And as long as it looks okay, we're going to keep pinning all the way along the top to hold that in place. Now for these corner bits, it's easiest if you press it down and then tuck it in. And you'll see, make sure it's completely hidden. And then that should be right on the edge. If anything, your seam line of your cuff should fall a little bit towards the inside, because then you won't see it when worn. So ideally right on the edge, but if it needs to be, then it can come just on the inside a little bit. So once that's completely tucked in, we'll just pin that in place from the right side and then continue pinning. I also do pin around the other 3 edges, just so that while I'm sewing, it doesn't distort or move at all. So I finished pinning the cuff, and I actually turned it wrong side out to finish pinning it, because the way the cuff curves, you might find it easier to pin that way. And so I've only put a few around the outside to hold it in place, and then there are a whole lot more pins that are holding the fold in place. So if I turn it over to the wrong side, just check that none of the seam is popping out from the top and the whole cuff is laying nice and flat. And as long as you're happy with that, then you can take it to the sewing machine, and on the cuff side of the seam, so starting on this side, you're going to do an 1/8 inch in top stitching all the way around.